So, China's Victory Day Parade. Let's talk about it. Alright, so in today's video, what we are going to be talking about is the parade itself, the event, who was there, what happened. Then we're going to be talking about what exactly they were celebrating. What's the history behind this? Then we'll be looking at Trump's response, his very emotionally loaded response. We'll also look a little bit at the parade that Trump had a couple of months ago. And then lastly, I want to close off with some of my own thoughts, my own ideas on what this means and what I read into this event. So first, before I get into any of those other things, I just want to talk a little bit about the parade itself and just the spectacle of it. This was something to see, man. Like I sat and I watched through almost this entire thing. Now, of course, China has done parades like this before. Other countries have also done military parades. This is the first time that I've actually paid so much attention to one myself. And man, was this something to watch. Look at this. This, I would argue, is the result of a country, of a nation that prioritizes the benefit of the community over the benefit and the desire of the individual. Now, that's not to say that China have not made some really bad mistakes in their past. There's no denying that. But this is an awesome thing to see. How I wish I could see something like this for South Africa. But unfortunately, I don't think that we are willing to make the sacrifices necessary, the tough decisions necessary to achieve something like this. And what I found that was very interesting was Xi Jinping's speech was framed as a choice between peace or war, and reinforcing their resistance against Western pressure. Remember, China knows what the West did to them in the past. The Opium Wars was just one example of that. There was a time when several different countries all had control of pieces of China. France, Britain, the US, Russia, Japan, each controlled a piece of China themselves. And China was falling apart. And they were being exploited for their goods, for their economy, for their resources, for their labor force. So it's an amazing thing to now see them at this stage, 80 years later, in a very different position. No longer in a position of vulnerability, but in a position of strength and power. But in their own words, I was listening to one part of the speech, in their own words, they said, we do not seek hegemony. They were saying that they don't intend on controlling the whole world. That's not important to them. And I think that statement really sums up the stance of China. It's not that we are boasting our strength and our military power to show off and to threaten that we are going to come knocking on your door, but to simply say that we are ready and able to defend ourselves. That we are not interested in having any spheres of influence by enforcing our military bases on any other countries. We've built our own strength. Alright, so next I want to talk a little bit about the history behind this parade. So again, what they were celebrating was the 80-year anniversary of the end of World War II, which is officially seen as having ended on September the 3rd, 1945. Now, World War II, according to the European narrative, started in 1939. But for China, it had already started in July of 1937. This was during what was called the Marco Polo Bridge event. At that time, Japan had already attacked and taken control of a certain region or part of China, specifically Manchuria. And they had established spheres of influence in and around key cities in China. Then comes July of 1937. And Japanese forces are busy carrying out military exercises very close to a particular village. And it's crazy to think that this battle started with a soldier having gone missing, a Japanese soldier, one soldier having gone missing. And their forces were pushing to get into a Chinese village to investigate and look for their soldier. And a small troop of Chinese soldiers protecting that bridge fought against an overwhelming Japanese force that turned into an absolute catastrophe, leading into what became the Second Sino-Japanese War. So that for China and also for other parts of Asia became the beginning of what turned into the Second World War. In Europe, the Second World War was seen as starting in 1939 when Germany invaded Poland. 3 days later, that was on the 1st of September, 3 days later, Britain and I think France declared war on Germany. And then it was only in 1941 when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor that the US officially got involved in the war, like directly. So that is what this event really means. And that brings me to Trump's reaction to this entire event. Apparently, Trump called this a conspiracy against the US, but at the same time, sarcastically sent his warmest regards to Putin and Kim, and at the same time accusing them of conspiring together with Xi Jinping. But the thing is, while Trump and a lot of his supporters are framing this as a target and a conspiracy against the US, the fact is this is a parade that's happened every 5 years. I think the first one of this particular kind, celebrating the end of World War II, started in about 2015. Then in 2020, of course, was COVID, and now this is the third one. There's also another parade that they have, which is the National Day parades, and that one is to mark the founding of the People's Republic of China in 1949. So every 10 years they have that parade.
A huge vanguard composed of more than 20,000 People's Liberation Army men, militiamen and Red Guards leads the parade. The Cultural Revolution Army, 1.5 million strong, is composed of workers, peasants, revolutionary intellectuals, cadres, and teachers and students. Like a great torrent, they marched past Tiananmen Square in high spirits to be reviewed by the great leader, Chairman Mao.
But the US, on the other hand, the parade that Trump had in June of this year, that was unusual. Because the last time that they had a parade on that scale was in 1991. There are also other smaller parades like inauguration parades, Veterans Day parades, and the 4th of July displays, but that's not really on the level that Trump was pushing for in the parade that he had in June. So if you have to compare the two, if you have to hold the two side by side, it's very clear to see the difference. I mean, in the US at that time, while that parade was happening, there were protests happening right at the venue of that parade.
2,000 separate demonstrations this weekend in all 50 states. So-called No King's Day protest voicing opposition to President Trump's agenda, and a joint birthday celebration he threw for the U.S. Army and himself.
So one can argue that Trump was the one who was actually trying to show off and show some kind of display of power, of macho-ness.
Every other country celebrates their victories. It's about time America did too. That's what we're doing tonight.
So again, my personal take on this parade is just that it's an amazing thing to see how far China has come. From having their dynasty era destroyed, a dynasty era that lasted for, I think, well over 1,000 years, destroyed by British imperialists and foreign Western powers using drugs, opium and exploitation, going through a period of civil war, then dealing with the Second World War, and having to rebuild itself from being a massively poor nation to reaching the point in 2020 when both the United Nations and I think the World Bank acknowledged that China had lifted 800 million Chinese people out of poverty. 800 million. And today, because of social media, we get to see what life in China is like today. And I have to be honest, I wish that life was like that for the average South African. I wish that the average South African could live that quality of life, not living off of the scraps of an unequal society, thriving on their poverty and ignorance. And so this is why education is so important for me. Because if we want to change things in our country, we need to understand how do we change it. And in order to be able to do that, we need to assess and learn from the mistakes and the successes of the countries that have grown around us, that have developed and reached some level of success in their own right. What can we take from that? So it's not to say that it's one particular ideology over another or one particular set of policies over another. We have to look at what applies and what works well for our nation. We have to be able to look at our areas of weakness, at the things that are destroying our societies and destroying our communities, and tackle those things head on. Gangsterism, drugs, alcoholism, poverty, and a broken education system. We have to tackle those things head on. I'll leave it at that. This was a very long video, but thank you for watching if you've gotten to this point. And as always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss the next video. Catch you guys in the next one.